Hi! With this video I start my series of scary videos for this year of 2022. So this is part of my October series of videos where I talk about paranormal things, occult things, and how they could be related to tabletop role-playing games. This time I am going to talk about the adventures that Gary Gygax experienced when he was younger. These are three separate occasions, and they are very unusual in the sorts of phenomena that he experienced, these sort of circumstances. So I am going to give you my thoughts on whether these things happened or not, according to my own occult philosophy angle. Maybe some of these things had a more common explanation, but we will see in a few moments, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on how you can integrate those experiences, Gary Gygax's occult or rather paranormal adventures, into your role-playing game sessions. Okay, let's get started. This one happened in 1947. Gary Gygax was about 8 years old. He was living in Lake Geneva by then. And his parents, they had to go on a journey, or they were traveling somewhere. So they left Gary with their friends, I think it's pronounced Demeris. Yes, the Demeris, and their son, David. So they were basically house sitting. They stayed at the house of Gary Gygax, and Gary and David, the son of the Demeris, they were playing all night. They were making so much noise and playing non-stop. So the parents, they thought it was time to go to bed. So they separated Gary and David. And Gary stayed at his room where there was this bunker bed. And they took David to another room, and they stayed at the room of the Gygaxes. So Gary Gygax was just about to go to sleep, or he had just begun to sleep, when he heard this crash, this loud crash. It sounded as if something landed on top of the house, or as if something got into the attic. And then he heard this really heavy stomping around the room, or rather around inside of the attic or over the house in the rooftop. He didn't know what it was. And then I think it was the mother, the Mrs. Daimeris, she went into Gary's room, and she thought that Gary was making that noise, but he was not. And the father also woke up. So now it was Gary and Mom and Pop Daimeris moving around the second floor, and the son David wouldn't wake up for some reason. It's like he didn't hear the sounds of the stomping noises in the attic. So armed with a baseball bat, the father decided to go up the attic. He was being followed by his wife and Gary. They were all quite terrified. But the moment he went to explore the attic, the sounds stopped. They stopped altogether. And they never found an explanation as to why that happened. So you have three witness accounts: Gary and the Daimeris. Okay, that's the first paranormal encounter. The second one happened a year later. Gary was staying alone in his house. His mother, I don't know if his dad had already died, but I do understand that the mother went out. I think she was working. So Gary was alone. He was in a room with his cat. And he was sitting in a chair just reading a book, when the door that was closed, that connected the room where Gary was at, I think it was the living room, with another room, it opened by itself. And the cat stood on its four legs, very tense, somewhat startled. And then Gary heard how these, like footsteps, when you are walking on a creaky wooden floor, he heard these footsteps approaching his chair, and he was terrified, and his cat was also terrified. So Gary didn't know what to do exactly. He was sitting there with his the cat got on his lap, and the animal was tense the entire time. And just when it appeared as if the strange entity had reached his chair, the footsteps just stopped. And the cat was, like I said, very out of tune, out of whack, whatever you want to call it. The animal was quite frightened, and Gary was feeling quite. It was a very dreadful situation because he didn't know if this thing was still inside the room with him. For all he knew, the thing could be staring at him. Maybe the thing was standing next to his chair, looking at him. So immediately, Gary, with call it courage or maybe a flight or fight response, he got up the chair. The cat fell off his lap. He got his hands on his weapons because he was educated in using tools and weapons since very little. I think this is very useful. There's a malicious agenda to disarm people so that they are killed more easily by criminals, because cops, they are not able to teleport when the crime is happening. Oftentimes they arrive when someone has been killed or hurt or murdered or etc. or robbed. So most of the time it's useless. People should be armed, because the only ones that are going to obey the do not carry weapons rule are going to be decent people. The criminals are always going to be carrying weapons. So it's the most moronic thing, and it's obviously to disarm people. So Gary got his hands, I think he got his axe and a knife and bow and arrows, and he spent the entire time quite restless, paranoid, worried for his own safety, because there was something in that house. And I think I will talk about why I think he did the correct thing, but that's at the end of this video. Let's move on to the next paranormal adventure. This happened when Gary was a teenager. This should have been mid-50s. There was this sanitarium called Oakwoods or Oak Lake Sanitarium. Gary used to call it Oak Hill because it was located on Catholic Hill. And it was an abandoned sanitarium with many dark rumors about it. They said that the patients were tortured, and all of those sanitariums, they are always haunted and cursed because a lot of them, they are used to experiment upon patients. They try different pharmaceutical products. By the way, take a search Quaker radioactive oats and you will find some very interesting things. So they carry out different experiments. The director, I think it was called the managing director of the entire place, he supposedly went insane. So yes, do not trust those sanitariums. They, who knows what sorts of experiments they carry out, and I think that a lot of them, they carry out sorcerers experiments as well, religious experiments where they summon demons and such, but in the most heinous and careless way imaginable. And so this sanitarium was abandoned, and Gary and his friends, they decided to do some urban exploration. The entire place served as inspiration for many future Dungeons and Dragons adventure modules. A lot of you already know that Greyhawk was based on the Blackmoor Castle from Dave Arneson. That's why it's called Greyhawk. Instead of Blackmoor, Grey, and it was another word, but Gary decided to change it because I think he considered that the other word that he didn't use, and I don't remember which one was, it was too much of a reference to Blackmoor. So Greyhawk came from that, and many of the features of Greyhawk and other dungeons, they come from inspiration obtained by Gary during his urban exploration of the Oak Lake or Oak Hill Sanitarium. The place was quite creepy. It had an entire underground labyrinth, very suspicious, more extensive than originally imagined by many. Gary and his friends tried to explore the entire underground labyrinth, but they never covered the entire thing. Very suspicious that a sanitarium has those sorts of places. We're talking an extensive labyrinth. And there were other places like this tower with a bell. It had a spiral staircase that was also used as inspiration for an infinite staircase in one of the adventure modules. I don't know if it was Castle Greyhawk or another one. Also, in that place, there were also rooms connected with pipes and tubes and compartments, and supposedly those tubes were used to pour gas into a room to knock out prisoners. Well, well, patients, right? But they are effectively prisoners, patients. And so there were also many traps, unstable, traps as you would expect them in an adventure site, because the floor was quite unstable. You could easily fall down. There were many secret rooms and locked rooms, and those places that were difficult to get. Gary Gygax and his friends got through windows, and I think there were also some holes. So when police came looking for them, because sometimes people reported that they saw lights at the sanitarium, etc. So police were called, and Gary and his friends used one of those secret rooms to hide. There was this, like their favorite room that they called Big Mike's room. So as I understand it, Big Mike's room had this sort of doorway, but Gary and his friends, they took boards and debris and they piled those things in front of the door, so that way if the police came looking for them, they didn't think about looking inside that room, because it was all covered up, so they thought it's impossible to get into that room, but they were hiding there. There were many risky situations. The sanitarium had several floors. I don't know if it had like 3 or 4, and sometimes they decided to jump down from the second floor and such, and like I said, in other cases the flooring was really unstable, so they had some risky moments. I think that Gary also risked his life by trying to impress a girl. Maybe he tried to jump from one place to the other or something. So the paranormal thing in this place happened in this occasion where they were exploring the second floor, and they heard this huge thing moving towards them. It was like toppling things and crushing things. I imagine old furniture and debris and such. And the Gary's friends decided to jump from the second floor. Very risky, considering, as I understand it, none of them were trained in any sort of acrobatics or parkour or free running. So they jumped from the second floor. I think that they probably climbed slash jumped from it. But Gary, the funny thing is that he didn't do that. I imagine that Gary rushed the staircase, and went down as fast as possible. But that's one of the moments where Gary didn't risk his life. But they didn't see anything. They just heard this thing approaching them very violently, toppling things and crushing things. Though, so they never knew exactly what it was. And these are the paranormal encounters. Now let's analyze them from an occult philosophy angle. The first case. If we were to look for more mundane explanations, you had these sounds of something that crashed, landed on top of the house or inside of the attic. Because the sound was so heavy, I think it's easy to discard that a person got inside. If you are a burglar or something, why would you be making so much noise? And it sounded so heavy. It was so heavy, like an animal got inside. That would be a possible explanation, but unlikely. Maybe you had like an Edgar Allan Poe situation where there was this huge animal that got inside, like in Edgar Allan Poe, in one of the stories, it was a gorilla. So maybe something heavy got in, and that was causing the noise. But you had, like I said, 3 witnesses, the Dimeris or Dimeris? Dimeris and Gygax, Gary. So I am inclined to think that this is actually that was a paranormal event or phenomenon. Because, well, I'm going to share a personal experience. In occult circles, it is quite common when it comes to sending, let's call them aerial spirits or demons in some cases, they usually, because they are aerial, they arrive via the air. Now, there is a misconception. Sometimes people think that those entities are just moving about freely, but no, it's actually very risky for different entities to move about like that. For example, the sun damages them, it can destroy them, so they will not move during the day unless they have some vehicle like possessing someone or moving from a dark place to another dark place. Oh, and remember, if you, like I said in other videos, if you don't think that this is possible or real or whatever, you just take this as some sort of fiction that you can use in your role-playing games. So like I said, those things, they can be sent and sometimes they arrive, they land on the top of the house. And you're not going to see them like some pulpy film. They are like invisible entities. But when it comes to the sound, I think it's not exactly as you would think. I will get to that in a moment. So first, I find it very suspicious, very strange, that two paranormal events happened in Gary Gygax's house. These things do not occur just like that. There are some very weird instances related to astrological and telluric means that perhaps an entity makes its way into this realm of earth or is close to the realm of matter. But I am inclined to think that perhaps Gary's house was either built upon some sort of terrain, perhaps the typical Indian graveyard or American Indian graveyard, maybe. And I'm more inclined to believe that, as I understand it, Gary Gygax's family, they were Christians, so maybe they summoned something by praying to the cadaver hanging from the cross. Maybe some of their rites. For those of you that do not know, the how do you call it in English? The Our Father prayer, the Our Father who art in, that one is actually that's a demonic prayer. Take a look at those moments where there is some sort of paranormal phenomena, and if you say that prayer, the phenomena is going to get worse, because you are not talking about God, you are talking about some other thing. Yes, it refers, there are some very suspicious parts of that, because God, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, how do you call it? All powerful. He's supposed to be everywhere. He's not just in the sky, and you do not need to like specify things in those sorts of prayers. So he supposedly, this, if we were to consider God some sort of like everything, the source of everything, he's everywhere. He's in heaven. He's well, you could say that heaven is part of him. You could say that hell is part of him. And the reason why the devil exists is because God allows the devil to exist. Because if God is all powerful, he could have destroyed the devil like this, or destroyed hell. So there are greater things to consider. It is not as presented by dogma and doctrine of different religions. In fact, yes, I think that maybe Gary Gygax summoned, or his family perhaps somehow called forth those things into their lives. After all, he also used real demonic names in some of the Dungeons and Dragons products, and his family has had some very tragic situations related to sickness, the house fire from one of his sons. Many people that do those sorts of demonic operations, the religious demonic operations, they usually cause fires. There are demons that can actually cause those things, and like I said, maybe a lot of you will not like these things. Use them as fiction for your role-playing games. So I am inclined to believe that maybe they called those things into their houses. And now back to my personal experience. A relative invited me to her house one time, many years back. And we were in total 4 people sleeping in that house. And we went to sleep, we were like that, and suddenly in the middle of the night, we heard this, like something crash landed on top of the house. And I woke up because I was the only man in the house at that time. And I was like thinking, oh, maybe a burglar got inside or something. But the only other person that heard that sound was my relative, and she was a bit worried. And we also had heard like some heavy sounds. I don't know if they could be considered the same that Gary heard of stomping sounds, but I decided to take action. And so I just told her to get into her room, and I did some things, basically. And my back then my technique was not as polished as it is today. But what I basically did was call upon a demon that was quite territorial when it comes to the aerial realms, and start to tell that demon that there is this entity that is threatening your realm, your domain, and he has insulted you by invading, and you basically get them to fight each other, because this is a religious propaganda makes you think that all of the demons are in cahoot against you, but they are constantly warring against each other as well. So I basically got him into a fight with the other demon, and then I called upon angels to, so that, because after giving that sort of, what would you say, instruction, and I told him, after you are done with that, go back to your realm, but you need to make sure that things are patched up. So I called upon angels to seal the gate so that those two entities were either destroyed or sent somewhere else. And the sounds stopped when I stopped the operation. And since then, that house has been free from any sort of paranormal problem. But here's the interesting thing. The next day, the other two people didn't hear the sound. This makes me think of the son, David the friend of Gary Gygax, that he didn't wake up. Only the parents and Gary, they heard the sound, but the other kid, he didn't wake up. It's like he never heard anything. And the other two people in the house, they didn't hear that loud crash and the stomping. So it's a sound that is heard on a different level, on a more subtle level, perhaps in the etheric plane, because in occultism, you divide the different planes in material plane, etheric plane, astral plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. So this probably happened either in the etheric or the astral. And because we were just waking up from sleep, just like Gary and the parents, perhaps our senses were a bit more in tune with those other planes, because as you will know, when you are in this sort of trance-like state, like when you are sleeping, you are perceptive to other things. So that's why they didn't wake up. For some reason, they didn't perceive that, the other two people. But one of them had this dream about this huge black gargoyle landing on top of the house. Very interesting. And the other person dreamt about this like beautiful melody, those sounds. So I think that the first person heard this the entity when it landed, and the other person listened or heard the sounds of the angels. Back then, my relative had some very insidious enemies, let's call it like that. So maybe they sent some sort of demonic attack or curse, like a brujeria, because she wasn't religious. So they probably sent something again after her, because shortly after that, the two of her enemies died. So maybe it was some sort of backlash because they called upon that demon, and perhaps they got in trouble with that same demon or the clan or family of that entity. So that's probably it. So I am inclined to think that this actually was paranormal, and it happened to Gary Gygax. Because I can't find another explanation, perhaps, unless someone was throwing like explosives or some sort of fireworks on top of his house. But is it the same sound? I don't think this stomping sound equals the sound of an explosive. So I'll leave that to you. You will decide if, as to the veracity of this event. Now let's move on to the other paranormal encounter. And here, because you only have Gary Gygax as the witness and the cat, well, I think if we are to trust Gary, I think it was also paranormal. Cats are very sensitive and perceptive when it comes to just things that are not easily seen or heard. That's why in Egypt they regarded cats with so much reverence or admiration. They are considered like the protectors of humanity, like the gatekeepers. They watch the passage between the realm of the dead and the living. That's why many evil people, like for example, Christians in the Middle Ages, they said that the cats were the tools of the devil, and they started killing all of those cats and encouraging people to kill cats, especially black cats, because black cats, they said they are bad luck, but no, black cats or cats with darker colors, like dark gray, the color black is associated with the energies of death of Saturn, the planet Saturn. So the color black absorbs energy. Black cats are usually employed by witches. Remember that witch means wise man or woman. The religion, specifically Christianity, decided to satanize the term. They called all sorts of evil sorcerers witches, but it means wise man or wise woman. It comes from the root, the Indo-European root, of witche or bitki. So practitioners from back then, they had black cats or dark gray cats because they absorb any sort of curse, any sort of vile entity, and they dissipate it or destroy it in the majority of cases. So that's why the Christians wanted to kill cats, because they were stopping the religious sorcery, all of those prayers to the dead guys, the saints, Jesus, those. You know how Christians adore or worship dead people? It's necromancy. It's basically a very vile form of necromancy. So the cats were there to expose them and to destroy the entities that they called and their vile energies. And even in modern times, you can also see some people killing cats, like some musicians, satanic musicians, like in black metal and all of that. They always want to, a lot of them, not all of them. I know you cannot generalize when it comes to genres of music, but different heavy metal people or black metal, you will find that some of the more famous ones, they were always trying to like encourage people to kill cats and all of that. So I think that the cat that Gary Gygax had actually wanted to, yes, actually perceived this entity when it came into the room. Now, when it comes to this invisibility sort of encounters, if we were to look for a more mundane explanation, maybe I think that would be a stretch. But what if the door, you know how it opened itself? Maybe there was some sort of a small tremor or some seismic movement. The tectonic plates, maybe they shifted a bit, and perhaps the door opened itself, and the sounds of the floorboards, like cracking or sounding as if something or someone was walking on them, maybe it was also the result of some sort of movement of the tectonic plates. Maybe there was like a tiny minuscule the start or the of an earthquake, perhaps, who knows, or like a ripple or something. Maybe that was the reason, but the cat was following the entity with its gaze. It was startled by it, and I think it got on top of Gary's lap to protect him from that, because like I said, cats, they are protectors of humanity. You can also see many situations where cats are protecting babies and small kids. You know those YouTube videos, look for a cat saves or rescues boy, etc. They have also wrapped themselves around babies that were abandoned in the cold. So maybe the cat was trying to protect Gary. The cat was following the entity. And in my case, every time I have carried out a ritual or ceremony or operation and I have one of my cats with me, It's very interesting because once you develop like what they call the second sight and you start to see things that others cannot, it's very interesting how the cat looks at the thing that you are looking. So if you are seeing some sort of flying thing and you think maybe that's in your imagination, but the way that the thing is moving, the cat is following it with its eyes. So the cat is also seeing it. You know, animals are very sensitive. They are able to perceive earthquakes and natural catastrophes before they happen. So I think that was also a paranormal encounter. Another possibility, but I don't think that makes too much sense, but there are many cases like strange videos that, oh, there was this invisible thing that moved this or that. But you know how different governments and the military, they have these invisibility clothes or cloaks. Maybe in some of those cases it's the a military, some scientist or military personnel carrying out experiments, moving around different streets and houses just to see if the cloaking device works. I think that also explains those weird videos that, oh, this person came out of nowhere. Maybe it was the result of the person removed its cloaking device, and then it seems like the person appeared out of thin air, but it was actually caused by that device that plays around with the light, with the reflection of the light. But I still think that because of the cat, it was actually a paranormal event. And I think that Gary had a very good instinct when it comes to these things. Sadly, maybe that instinct was hampered by his religious background. Gary has said in another video in a convention, he said that his last name, Gygax, or rather Gygax as it was originally pronounced, supposedly he descends from Goliath, you know, from David versus Goliath. He's supposedly one of the descendants of Goliath, he said. Who knows, but that's quite interesting. So maybe he had some sort of genetic information on how to deal with those things, because he immediately went for his axe and his knife and his arrows. Those all have like pointy metal tips. Any sort of metallic pointy object can serve against a lot of entities in those situations. That's why many grimoires and books of ceremonial magic and all of that, they tell the practitioner to arm himself or herself with daggers and swords, and they are basically to threaten the entities or sometimes to defend yourself against them. But in more advanced cases, you won't need those things at all. So maybe Gygax had that instinct of immediately arming himself with a metal implement, pointy metal implement, to attack the entity if it somehow decided to interact with him in a hostile way. So I think that was also paranormal. Now let's move on to the sanitarium situation or happening. It's very difficult to tell if it's paranormal or not, because the only information we had is that there were several witnesses, Gary and his friends, but they didn't see anything. They only heard something approaching in the darkness, something quite big. Maybe it was an animal. What if some sort of animal got inside the sanitarium? I think there have been some cases in which some places flooded, and sometimes there have been crocodiles, or I don't think that sanitarium was flooded, but maybe some other thing got in, maybe a large dog. Who knows? So you never know what you're going to find in an urban exploration. I think maybe it was a hobo or someone that, you know, someone that took shelter inside of the sanitarium and wanted Gary and his friends to leave the place. Maybe he got angry, or maybe he was stumbling about. So I don't think there is enough information to say if something was paranormal. Very difficult to know, to tell. But yes, if you want to look for haunted sanitariums, there are going to be a lot of videos out there. The other day I was watching this. There's a channel called Exploring with Fighters. They carry out some paranormal investigations in a somewhat... I wouldn't say in a very professional way. This sounds a bit like despective or like an insult, but no, what I mean is that they don't use very sophisticated devices, and they do not fill the place with cameras and all of that, but I think they are honest in their labor to try to obtain some evidence. I'm going to put a link in the description to this recent video where they camped in an asylum that is supposedly, this sanitarium that is supposedly haunted. So even if you think that maybe they faked some of the evidence, I think it's possible to fake using different cameras and devices, but like I said, I think they are honest in their search. But it would still, it could serve as source material for your adventures and campaigns. If you want to have like a haunted sanitarium or any other adventure site that is cursed or has some sort of paranormal happenings, you can use that video as inspiration. So yes, I think that in this third paranormal situation, it's very difficult to say if it was actually paranormal or not. Now, when it comes to using it in your tabletop role-playing games, in the first case of the thing that landed on top of the house or inside of the attic, I think this is perfect to start a horror adventure. Maybe the player characters are enjoying dinner or having just drinks or something. They are sitting in the living room and suddenly they hear this crash on top of the house. And that starts the entire thing. How are they going to react to that? Are they going to go up the attic or up the roof and explore? Oh, and by the way, in the case of my relative's case, I went up the roof the next day and there wasn't anything like evidence of something walking or stomping around, which makes me think that it was actually something that was occurring in the etheric or astral plane, not in the material plane. So, like I said, in an adventure, you could start the entire thing like that. Or maybe they decide to go out of the house and call police or whatever, and they investigate things and there is nothing. But this becomes a repeating occurrence, maybe throughout an entire month. They keep hearing this thing crash landing on top of the house or getting into the attic. So that's perfect for a Call of Cthulhu scenario. Maybe it's a night gaunt. Who knows? Something like that. In the second case, invisible entities, they are always fun to introduce in RPG adventures. You could handle it as a sort of Metal Gear situation. Do you remember Metal Gear Solid? When Snake went into this elevator and the elevator was measured for a certain number of people and Snake was apparently alone inside of the elevator, but because of the data obtained, he found out that there were actually people wearing cloaking devices inside of the elevator with him and a big fight occurs. So maybe you can have some characters going into rooms or going on top of boats or ships, and it feels as if a lot of weight got into the boat or on top of the boat. Maybe the room has like I said, like wooden flooring, and when the character or group of characters enter this room, it sounds as if 10 or more characters got in. The floorboards are making noise, like cracking or creaking noises, and that's because other invisible entities went with them inside of the room, or they got onto the boat as well. So that's very creepy. And maybe you can give some information that the invisible entities were with them all along. Maybe many things happen during the adventure, many things that only occur when the player characters are alone or with other people, and when they confront this demon or spirit or whatever, it starts to tell them things that happened when that entity was not present. That's because the entity was with them all along, but it was invisible. So that's also a bit unnerving. And in the case of the sanitarium, well, there isn't much to tell besides using those haunted sanitariums as inspiration for your horror adventures. There are many horrifying adventure site ideas that you can come up with when you explore different, well, look at videos or read about or do some urban exploration. You can come up with some inspiration concerning rooms and traps based on the things that are found in those abandoned sites. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I am actually thinking of There are a couple of very creepy, unusual places here in Mexico. I found two videos, with one video for each of those places, that have to do with some terrifying rituals, and I think they will serve as great inspiration for more complex occult or paranormal themed, or rather religious themed adventure sites. So yes, I think I'm going to be making a video based on that. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, that you found it informative and entertaining. If you have any suggestions, maybe you heard about this or that is related to the paranormal things, creepy things. If you have some supernatural or paranormal situations or encounters of your own, some paranormal experiences, also share them in the comments section, and I could feature them in a video using them for role-playing game ideas while giving my own thoughts on the situation as an occultist. So thank you for watching this video, thank you for your likes and your comments, and thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. So once again, thank you and see you later.